Hello everyone, friends. Today, we have an interesting topic on the agenda, how to create an atmospheric track. And I'm happy to show you the recipe for making atmospheric tracks. By the way, something really interesting has happened with these tracks lately. They've been gaining quite a bit of serious popularity. And across different genres, they use the same stylistic techniques. From atmospheric funk to kinkwich house, it's basically the same style. And with witch house, it's not even clear where the house part is, since the rhythm is broken, but overall, it's all pretty serious stuff. I see a lot of views for this kind of music now. The last time something like this happened was probably back in the 1990s, during the days of Enigma, Enya, and Mylene Farmer, all that atmospheric vibe. There were tons of projects like Nevich, Deep Forest, Stali Vershanti, and so many more. Then, in the 2000s, it kind of faded away, and in the 2010s, it didn't really make a comeback. But somewhere at the end of the 2010s and the start of the 2020s, we've had another boom of all sorts of atmospheric music. Sometimes it's uplifting, sometimes it's melancholic and depressive, but the recipe for making it is always the same, which is actually pretty simple. I'm not going to make a video like, put this here, put that there, and now you have an atmospheric funk track, because that doesn't develop your compositional thinking. You might copy something like that, but it'll be hard to write your own, or if you need to make something a bit different, you won't be able to, because you need to understand the pyramid, what to build from. So, while I was preparing for this topic, I quickly put together a little segment, and let's start right away with the drop and listen to this haze. So, I don't think you really need to dig deep to realize that this track is super atmospheric. Usually, beginners tend to think in terms of timbres instead of compositional patterns and techniques. They'll say, well, there's some kind of Irish violin here, and some kind of Irish harp, and a girl singing with a voice like she's in a cave under a waterfall, and that all adds to the atmosphere. Of course, that plays a role, no doubt, but honestly, that's more like second or third place. The most important thing is the principle of a lot, when there's a lot of legato and very little staccato. There's a staccato way of playing an instrument, and there's legato. Legato is more drawn out and smooth. Naturally, we can't make everything legato, because if we do, we'll end up with ambient music. Sure, ambient is atmospheric, but that's a whole different thing. And ambient deserves its own separate review. So, we need to stick to something like the Pareto principle, maybe 80-20, so that 80% is legato and 20% is staccato, or maybe 70-30. If you look at other popular genres, there's definitely more staccato. That's the first thing to pay attention to. Don't be scared of legato, my friends. And the second thing is low intensity. So, if we can play a certain part, let's say it's the lead melody, we could play it in the usual way, but most likely it will sound better if we slow it down, basically stretch it out to twice its length. We always test it with an effect like the one now, called halftime, or just by stretching it out. You can also stretch out notes in MIDI. There's nothing difficult about it, so we always try out more stretched versions, and that's our next point, low intensity. Even though the beat sounds pretty normal in terms of intensity, there's nothing special about it. If I turn on the drums, I could basically fit almost any genre under them. I could put boom bap here, or some 2000s hip hop, and it would all work. So there's nothing particularly unique about them. They just sound the way they sound. Everything else is mostly legato and mostly low intensity. And now we move on to timbres. This is the next step in our pyramid of atmosphere. And again, we're not talking about things like, where do I find vocals like that, some elf-like singer, or where do I get a harp like that, because that's really not the point. The main atmospheric weight here is actually carried by a regular synth, not some kind of folk instrument. It's the respace that does the job. So pay attention to how it sounds. It's the respace that really pulls us in and puts us in that mood, more so than the elf-like singer in this part. If I play her vocals without the bass, it just doesn't feel the same, even though her voice is dressed up with reverb and all those nice effects. Still, it won't sound fully atmospheric. Let's listen to her without the respace. But now, let's listen to the respace without the elf vocals. This is what's slowing us down, naturally. It's the respace that's slowing us down. Here, it's under the main layer. So if we listen closely to some of the really popular genres right now, like atmospheric funk, for example, producers like, if you know, Lux Center, his whole music is built around different kinds of respace. You almost never hear any slap or staccato bass there. In some situations, maybe it's not a respace but a pad, for example, set low, but even then it still has that legato feel, and that's exactly what creates that vibe. From a theoretical standpoint, there really aren't any strict rules here. There aren't even any common step progressions or cliches for you to go through, unlike some genres where there are set step cliches you follow to create a certain atmosphere. Here, I don't see much point in listing those out. Just try not to be in a major key, and if you are in a major key, don't start from the first degree, so you don't end up sounding overly major. People are used to hearing this kind of atmospheric stuff in a minor setting, and if you do use major, try not to hit the first, third, sixth, or seventh degrees too often, or else it'll start leaning too much toward rainbows, bunnies, meadows, and all that. So be careful with that. So, we figured out that the third level in our pyramid of atmosphere is the res bass, and only now do we get to timbres. See, timbres aren't actually that important here, because I could use non-folk instruments as well. The only reason I chose them is because they give quick results. I can easily demonstrate it to you, but you can just as easily use synths here, and it'll still sound atmospheric. Everything will be fine. Folk instruments are just a quick way to get them to fit into the mix right away. So, the next thing we do, when I pick these obviously grotesque options like harp, elf-like sounds, and a bit of violin, yeah, we don't have a ton of options here. If you're tweaking a synthesizer, there are a lot of atmospheric sounds based on sine waves now, and when you add a glide effect to the sine, that's something I'll show you in another video. But the most important thing here is to really catch that vibe. Naturally, I'm leaning on these sort of new agey options, where some folk instruments are used. The main idea is that you can use whatever you want here, as long as it works with the res bass and doesn't clash with it too much in the spectrum. And again, pay attention to the rule about sustain and legato, because if you listen to the vocals, they're not very staccato, they're legato. It's not like rap, obviously. If I put some rap here, it would sound weird, especially if it's up front. So, listen to the vocals. The notes are a bit more intense than in the res bass, but they're still mostly legato, not choppy. Same thing. For example, if we listen to this section, again, it's legato, and that's what creates the atmosphere for us. So, we've touched on timbres and what they can be. I'm just saying folk instruments, but again, the main rule is more legato. And when it comes to things related to space, I wouldn't even call it mixing or sound engineering, because here it's more about creative use of reverb and delay, rather than mixing. In mixing, reverb is often used to give space, to glue together different instruments so they don't sound like they're each in their own room. But here, We're really just picking which delays and reverbs we like best. Here's a life hack for you. In Valhalla Shimmer, you can make almost anything sound atmospheric. If you set the mix to maximum, well, I use it as a synth, but if you put it on an insert and set the mix to max, you can turn ordinary sounds into pads while keeping their timbre. So pay close attention to that. As you can see, I have a lot of synths related to atmospheric sound, lots of delays, a couple of reverbs. There are naturally more delays than reverbs, because if you use too much reverb, it gets muddy. So I always set up delays first, and then, if there's room left, I add reverb. That way, I get both space and clarity. If I start with reverb, well, there's this practice where you start building space with reverb, but at first, it always feels like there's not enough space, so you end up turning the reverb up too high in the mix. And then there's no room left for delays, and your mix gets muddy because of all that space. So there's a little trick to it, and that's it. Basically, that's how our whole pyramid of atmospheric tracks comes together. I hope this was useful and informative for you, and I'll see you in my next video, which will be out soon. All the best, friends.